In mid-1942, the Empire of Japan was doing rather well for itself, having collected most of the Pacific like a particularly aggressive set of Pokémon. Then they landed on a volcanic smudge in the Solomon Islands called Guadalcanal. Their plan was to build an airfield to threaten the supply lines between the US and Australia, a perfectly sensible military objective. The American High Command, fresh off a string of spectacular defeats, looked at their maps and decided this was the place to finally, maybe, do something offensive. So they grabbed the 1st Marine Division, a group of men extensively trained for amphibious assaults on beaches, and prepared to send them into a triple canopy jungle. What could possibly go wrong? The Japanese, for their part, viewed the island as a remote construction project, not the future site of a 6-month-long blender of human lives. The Marines landed on August 7, 1942, and were met with the fiercest resistance imaginable. Absolutely nothing. The Japanese construction crews had simply vanished into the jungle. It was all very anticlimactic. The Marines captured the partially built airfield, named it Henderson Field, and probably thought the worst was over. Then they met the island itself. Guadalcanal wasn't just a location, it was an active participant in the war, and it hated everyone equally. The jungle rotted their clothes off their backs, the humidity was a physical weight, and the rain turned everything into a soupy mud. And the wildlife, giant centipedes, scorpions, land crabs, and crocodiles. Oh, and mosquitoes carrying malaria, which would eventually cause more casualties than the actual fighting. This wasn't warfare, it was a hostile ecosystem that occasionally had bullets in it. Tokyo's reaction to the American landing was one of mild annoyance. They dispatched an elite unit, the Ichiki Detachment, to go swat the flies away. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki was a man supremely confident in the spiritual superiority of his soldiers. He figured a few hundred Americans, probably soft and undisciplined, were no match for his veterans. So on the night of August 21st, he ordered a direct, frontal bayonet charge across a sandbar on the Tenaru River, right into the sights of dug-in Marines with machine guns and canister shot. It was less of a battle and more of a large-scale industrial accident. The Marines' M1917 Browning machine guns were water-cooled, meaning they could fire almost indefinitely as long as you had ammo and, well, water. The jungle provided the water. Ichiki provided the targets. Of the nearly 900 men who charged, fewer than 150 survived. It was a brutal, bloody lesson that shouting "Banzai" doesn't, in fact, stop bullets. Henderson Field became the single most important piece of real estate in the entire Pacific. Holding it meant controlling the skies, and controlling the skies meant you could prevent the other guy from landing thousands of angry men on your doorstep. The collection of pilots and cobbled-together aircraft that defended it became known as the Cactus Air Force, because Cactus was the island's code name, and everything there was prickly and trying to kill you. These pilots flew F-4F Wildcats that were often outclassed by the Japanese Zeros, but they made up for it with tactics and sheer stubbornness. Living at Henderson Field was a unique kind of awful. You'd fly a mission, get shot at, land, and then get shelled by Japanese warships or bombed by planes from Rabaul. There was no rear area. The runway was the front line. Mechanics worked miracles with salvaged parts, pilots flew while sick with malaria, and the whole operation ran on fumes, coffee, and pure, unadulterated spite. Having learned nothing from Ichiki's disaster, the Japanese sent General Kawaguchi with several thousand more men to try again in September. Kawaguchi at least had a plan, a very complicated plan. He would send his forces on a multi-day trek through the trackless jungle to attack the ridge defending Henderson Field from the south. The jungle, however, did not care about his timetable. His men got lost, separated, and exhausted, arriving at the battle late and in disorganized chunks. Defending the ridge was Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike, and his 1st Raider Battalion. For 2 straight nights, they endured wave after wave of attacks in desperate, close-quarters fighting. At one point, Edson had to call artillery down on his own position to break up an attack. It was a chaotic, terrifying meat grinder that earned the location a new name: Bloody Ridge. The Japanese plan, so elegant on paper, had dissolved into a series of futile, uncoordinated charges against an enemy that simply refused to break. While men were killing each other in the jungle, the waters around Guadalcanal were hosting their own special kind of horror show. The U.S. Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy engaged in a series of brutal nighttime brawls. The Japanese were masters of night fighting. Their lookouts had incredible eyesight, their tactics were superb, and they had the Type 93 torpedo, nicknamed the Long Lance. It was faster, had a longer range, and carried a bigger warhead than any Allied torpedo. American commanders, steeped in a tradition of daytime gun duels, kept sailing into ambushes and getting their ships blown out from under them. So many ships from both sides were sunk in the channel between Guadalcanal and the Florida Islands that it was renamed Iron Bottom Sound. Meanwhile, the Japanese used fast destroyers on moonless nights to ferry troops and supplies to the island. The Americans called it the Tokyo Express, a disturbingly casual name for a nightly delivery service of death and destruction. By October, the campaign had devolved into a contest of which side could keep its men supplied. This is the boring part of war that's also the most important, and the Americans were just slightly better at it. The Cactus Air Force made it nearly impossible for slow Japanese cargo ships to reach the island. The Tokyo Express could only bring in what men could carry, which meant ammunition but not heavy artillery or, crucially, food. The Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal began to starve. Their daily ration dropped to a bowl of rice, then less. They were reduced to eating coconuts, snails, and the roots of plants. Disease and malnutrition killed far more than American bullets. The once elite soldiers were reduced to skeletal figures and rags. The Americans weren't living in luxury. Their diet was a monotonous rotation of captured Japanese rice and spam, but they were being fed. In this war of attrition, the side with more canned meat was going to win. Finally, after 6 months of pouring men and material into the Guadalcanal meat grinder, the Japanese High Command in Tokyo did something shockingly rational. They gave up. They realized the island was a lost cause and decided to cut their losses. In February 1943, under the noses of the Americans, they executed a brilliant evacuation. While a small rearguard made it seem like they were preparing for another attack, the Tokyo Express, for once running in reverse, spirited over 10,000 starving but living soldiers off the island. The Americans, now mostly U.S. Army soldiers who had relieved the exhausted Marines, cautiously advanced, expecting a final, brutal fight. They found only abandoned positions, makeshift graves, and discarded equipment. The nightmare was over. Guadalcanal was a turning point, the first major land victory for the Allies in the Pacific. It was also a 6-month masterclass in mutual misery that taught both sides that victory in the jungle would be costlier and more horrific than anyone had ever imagined. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!